Okay, if you were watching this YouTube video, you get some very important information right now. This week we had Monday, Memorial Day off, meaning normally we have 5 days of work for ELA, for comprehension. However, there's only 4 days. So if you're watching this YouTube video, what very special thing you get to do is we have this about the journalists. We have this last page left. We have this side that's about integration of knowledge and ideas, and we have this side that's writing. You get to choose which one you're doing, cross the other page off, and just write YouTube on it. Then I will know when I go back through to grade your packet, oh, they watched the YouTube video, they know. So if you're watching this video, it means you, because you're like going through and taking your time, right, getting help if you need it, get to choose. If you don't want to do this side, cross it off and just write YouTube so that I know that it wasn't just you being lazy, that you were like, wait, Ms. Rue said I could. Or you can cross off this side and write YouTube. So, yay, which is very fun. Now, if you want to do both sides, can you? Of course you can. Of course. But I did think since Monday was off, if you'd like to do one less, that's totally fine. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go through both sides of the page to kind of help you get through it. So if you want to do this first side, listen now. And otherwise, just skim through like a couple minutes to get to the back writing part. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense and that helps. If you would like to do both sides, go for it. That's a wonderful way to encourage your brain to grow. I just didn't want to give you a ton of homework on Friday. So, number one, how do the picture and caption relate to the passage? So, here's the picture, here's the caption. The picture is, it says press, which refers to, this is obviously a journalist. He's got even his little pencil in his cap. And then the caption says, journalists on the news who work for magazines and papers are also called reporters. Some interview people. So you probably see that most often. You see a lot on TV channels, right? Where someone will be sitting in a chair, or maybe they'll be outside and they'll have a microphone, be asking someone questions. Sometimes it gets written up in a newspaper. Sometimes it stays in video form. So it kind of gives you some more information helping to explain what a journalist is. So what you'd put here is the picture and caption relate, because remember, relate is similar to, think about it, you're related to your cousin, right? You're not the same, but it's close, like you're in the same family. So this isn't the exact same words from this text, but it's talking about it, right? It gives you more information. It explains why the picture is important. It gives you a vocabulary such as reporter. A reporter is a person who writes or gives a report. Okay, so it kind of helps you with vocabulary. It helps you to visualize the job and the person who might have the job. So you can talk all about that here. I just gave you like a ton of examples. If you want to use something else, go for it. Number two, how does the author support the point made in the second sentence of the first paragraph? Okay, second sentence of the first paragraph. First paragraph, second sentence. Information needs to be shared. Okay, so if the author says information needs to be shared, how do they support that? We're looking at this sentence right here. Information needs to be shared. So how do they support that? Let's see. Well, they support it by saying that people need to know the news. If people need to know the news, then the information needs to be shared. They support it through talking about even like feeling like missing a birthday party, right? If you don't know the information, you missed it. So another way that they support that information needs to be shared is giving you an example of when you don't have correct information. They talk about how the journalist reports on news. It talks about giving information. It talks about talking about what's happening. All those are reasons that the information needs to be shared. There's a lot of information out there, but if it's not shared and if we're not told about it, how are we supposed to know? It doesn't do any good if there's information that we're not hearing about. How does the author support the point made in the second sentence of the first paragraph? So I'll help you start it. The point that the author is making is that information needs to be shared. So we'll start with that. Information needs to be shared because tell a reason. Pick one reason why information needs to be shared. Okay, number 3. Look at the first sentence of the second paragraph. What reasons are given to support this point? Okay, first sentence, second paragraph. Here's the second paragraph. Okay, first sentence. Journalists have always been around. Okay, so we need some reasons that journalists have always been around. Okay, so let's keep reading. How do we know journalists have always been around? The first ones used pencil and paper. They also used typewriters. They worked for newspaper and magazine companies. Today, they report information on television and other electronics. Can you imagine only getting information from newspapers? Oh, so I guess if they've always been around, you can tell they've been around because you can find news reports that were on pencil and paper. You could find reports that were typed on typewriters. You can find news that journalists have written in newspapers and magazines. Like, you could actually find those things, right? You could hold it in your hands. You can prove that has existed. So I suppose that we know that journalists have always been around because we can look at the evidence from what they've written. Okay, it'll look different if it was from a while ago. Of course, it won't be like an Instagram post, right? That's just now. But if you're looking at the argument that journalists have always been around, well, cool. You could look at things that were written a long time ago. They might look very different and have used different tools, but the idea that a journalist is just someone that gives information, right? It's someone that gives nonfiction text to the public to tell them what's happening. So we're going to start with journalists have always been around. Okay, so we know journalists have been around because we know journals have been around because we can look back and see writings that were on pencils and papers. We can see reports that have been typed on typewriters. We can look back through newspapers and magazines to read old journal reports. Okay, you could even go back, I would argue, before that. Now, I don't know that you could use that evidence here because we want to use evidence from the text. But you can go back farther in time and see other kinds of manuscripts and scrolls and whatnot and see writing from even farther ago, because as long as man has been alive, they've been sharing information in some way. Even, you guys remember my favorite movie, The Croods, where cavemen would like draw on walls. You maybe wouldn't call that journalist, but it is sharing information and ideas. So it doesn't talk about that here, so we're not going to use that as evidence because we want to make sure that we're using evidence from text. This text goes back to journalists using pencils and paper, which obviously those were invented at some point. But it's kind of neat to know that people have been trying to share information and pass it around to other people for a very long time. And lastly, number 4, what reasons does the author give to support the points made in the first sentence of the last paragraph? Okay, first sentence, last paragraph. Here's the last paragraph, first sentence, okay? Now, journalists have many ways to report the news. Okay, So there's a lot of points that the author makes to show that journalists have a lot of ways to report the news now. There's a lot of words in here like technology has changed, right? Smartphones, computers. It talks about specific things like blogs, websites, and apps that share the news. Okay. All of those things are ways that the author supports that there's many ways to report the news. So the author shows many ways to report. That's the word I was looking for. To report. See, I went back and just looked at the text. Ha. The news. Zoop. Such as. Okay. So the author shows many ways to report the news, such as, tell me some of the ways that authors report the news now that's different than it was even like honestly 10 years ago. It's changed so much. 5 years ago with these like apps, quite different. So talk about different ways that the news is reported now. Okay, if you chose to do the backside, think about the last time you read the newspaper or watched journalists report news on television. Write about what you read or heard. Okay, if you have read a news recently from a newspaper or from a TV report, great, write about that. If you haven't, find one. If you're interested and you're like, actually, I haven't read a newspaper or seen a journalist report on television. What I am going to say is maybe get your family to help you with this, because there's a lot of different news articles that you may or may not want to read, and as well things on the news. Okay, there's some things that you might be like, oh, cool, and some things that you might say like, I don't really want to see that right now. Okay, so if you're interested in doing that, go for it. But also be careful of what you read and make sure that you're looking at something that you can talk about with your family members. So how I'll start this is think about a time that you read the newspaper. I think what I'm going to do, guys, is on Class Dojo, I'll send out a couple of links to like YouTube videos for different news reports. So if you want to, you can click on one of those links and watch those. And then if you want to, you can choose to write about those. So I'll give you a couple sentence starters. So first you might say like, I watched or I read, whatever you did. If it was TV, you're going to do watched. If it was newspaper, you're going to do, I'll give you the choice, read. So you pick which one it is. I watched or I read a report about what? So what did you watch or read about? You can talk about what you learned. I learned what. You can talk about I felt. I felt what. You can talk about if you want to be a change maker and do something. Maybe it's something where you see a news report and you're like, wow, like I want to make my community better like that person. Maybe it's a weather report and you learn that you should pack a rain jacket because it's gonna rain. Maybe it's a traffic report and you think about like, oh, maybe I should change what time, we're leaving. Or maybe it's about coronavirus report and you're thinking, okay, well, something that I learned is about, staying 6 feet away from people. Maybe it makes you feel a certain way, right? And then lastly, you could write something about how you can share the information. I can share this information by, is it something that you would tell your family about? Is it something you would talk to your teacher about? Is it something you'd share with other kids? Is it something that you would probably just keep to yourself and think about? Is it something that you're like, you know what, this report didn't really affect my life. I don't really care. It was new information, cool, but it's probably like I might forget it actually soon because it's not super important to my life. That's okay too. So these are just some ideas of how to start sentences. Obviously, it will change based on what you watched. So what I'm going to do actually is on Class Dojo right now. I'm going to link a couple different articles or a couple different videos. When I know that I'm going to link is actually I want to find one on the Rose Parade because I helped build floats for a lot of years for a float company, so I'm definitely going to find one of those videos. So I'll throw a couple links up there, and if you're not quite sure about what news article to watch, you can click on one of those and then write about it.